My name is Cora, and I'm 29 years old. I'm a dental hygienist in downtown Milwaukee, but right now, none of that matters. All that matters is the silence. The terrible, crushing silence that filled my backyard on the day I realized I was finally, utterly alone. My own family, my father, my mother, my brother ignored my son's 5th birthday party, and 3 days later, my father had the audacity, the pure, unadulterated gall, to text me demanding $2,200 for my brother's graduation. I sent him $1. That single dollar was the beginning of the end, the fuse to a bomb that had been ticking for 29 years. Before we get into the rest of this family drama, this story of calculated cruelty and the fight to reclaim my life, please hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I need to know I'm not the only one who had to choose peace over the people who were supposed to love them the most. You want to know what heartbreak smells like? It smells like superhero-themed frosting and stale bounce house air. That's what Lucas's 5th birthday was. I'd gone overboard, you know? Balloons, a bounce house, a cake that cost a week's worth of groceries. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. And I was determined to give Lucas the kind of day I never had, the kind of day where the people who mattered actually showed up. I sent the invitations 6 weeks ahead. I texted reminders. I even offered rides. Of course, we'll be there, my mother had said, her voice dripping with that smooth, false reassurance that always covered up a lie. Tyler can't wait to see him, my father had added, using my brother's name like some kind of golden guarantee. But they never came. They just never came. I stood by the window, watching the empty driveway. Not one car. Not one. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message. A last-minute excuse. An emergency. Anything that would explain the void. Nothing. Just the sound of that rented bounce house, squeaking in the backyard, mockingly cheerful, and my 5-year-old, my sweet, excited boy asking, "Did Grandpa get lost?" I smiled, lied, and told him, maybe. That night, I boxed the leftover cake and tried not to cry, trying to make the sound of the cardboard box closing louder than the sound of my own shattered expectations. I'm Cora, and I'm 29. I'm a dental hygienist in downtown Milwaukee and a single mom to the best kid I know. My life is small but steady. Morning coffee before Lucas wakes, a short drive past the lake, patients who joke about flossing. I thought stability meant peace, but what I realized that day, watching the sun set on a party meant for one, was that stability just made me an easier target. For as long as I can remember, our family's motto has been family first, except that motto never, ever meant me. My father, Gary, is the type who believes control equals love. He demands, he dictates, and he leverages every single thing he's ever done for you. My mother smooths everything he says, like she's ironing wrinkles in a shirt, erasing the sharp edges of his cruelty. My brother Tyler is the golden child, the one who can never fail, the one who always gets bailed out. My sister Bethany is the baby, the one who never has to apologize. And me? I'm the dependable one, the good helper, the one who's always fine on her own. When I got pregnant with Lucas, they said they'd support me in spirit. Translation? They gossiped to their church friends while I worked double shifts to buy diapers. They came to the hospital once for a whole 15 minutes and left when I started crying. From then on, I stopped expecting softness from them. I just wanted basic decency, showing up when it mattered. The birthday was my last plea for that decency, and they stomped on it. The next morning, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no excuses. I told myself, maybe something happened. Maybe I'd get an apology. Instead, 3 days later, my phone buzzed. And there it was, the demand. The total, utter lack of shame or awareness. Need $2,200 for your brother's graduation party? Send by Friday. That was my father's entire message. No hello. No mention of the party they skipped. Just numbers and a deadline. Like a bill collector. I stared at it for a long time. I thought about the cake I threw out, the candles I saved because Lucas wanted to try again next year. I thought about the last time my father asked me for money Tyler's car repair. I paid it, of course, because that's what family does, right? But something about this text, this cold, clinical demand after such a profound, intentional abandonment, finally flipped a switch. I realized I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an ATM. I was a resource they could exploit without thanks, without apology, without even the bare minimum of human compassion. At the clinic that day, while scraping plaque and smiling through small talk, I kept replaying his words. Need $2,200. Not please, not thank you, just need. I finally saw the truth. They'd trained me to be useful, not loved. And that night, after Lucas fell asleep, I opened my banking app. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a terrifying, exhilarating adrenaline. I typed in $1. In the memo line, I wrote, "Best wishes." Then I hit send. I waited for regret to hit. It didn't. Instead, there was a strange, powerful calm. For once, I hadn't obeyed. I'd drawn a line. I didn't know it yet, but that single dollar would start a war that would end with police lights outside my house, and I was finally ready to fight it. The next morning, the war officially began. My phone started buzzing before the sun even crested the horizon. It was a text from Gary, my father. "I think there's a mistake. You only sent $1. He phrased it like a question, but the tone, even through cold digital text, was that same suffocating tone of authority he always used. He was giving me an out, a chance to obey, to fall back in line and immediately wire the $2,199 I still owed him. But that Cora was gone. She died the night I boxed up Lucas's birthday cake. I stared at the screen, sipping coffee that had already gone cold, the adrenaline from the night before still thrumming in my veins. There was no mistake. I typed back, "There's no mistake. That's all I could afford after the birthday you skipped." Then I hit send and immediately turned my phone face down. I left it there for the rest of the day, forcing myself through my shift at the clinic, scraping plaque, smiling at patients, talking about fluoride while inside. I was shaking, waiting for the inevitable blast. Silence. For hours there was nothing, not a single message. I almost convinced myself maybe he understood. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of shame or embarrassment. That was the old Cora thinking again, the one who hoped for goodness in people who had proven their wickedness time and again. Just before closing time, my phone lit up again. It wasn't a question this time. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a flat, cold-blooded warning. "You're being disrespectful. Family helps family. We'll talk tomorrow." That last line, "We'll talk tomorrow," was never a suggestion. It was a sentence. It meant he was coming over to put me back in my place, using that old, terrifying tone of voice that had kept me obedient since I was a teenager. I knew what that meant. A lecture on all the sacrifices he'd made, all the ways I owed him, all the reasons I could never truly stand on my own 2 feet. But he was too late. He didn't know the chains were already rusted through and breaking. On the drive home, I called Destiny, my best friend. "You know that refinance we talked about?" I said. "The house?" I did it. There was a pause on the other end, then her sharp, shocked inhale. "You actually did it?" "I did. A month ago. I finalized the papers and took his name off everything. He just didn't know yet." Destiny's voice softened, but her words were razor sharp. "Then, honey," she said, "you've already won more than you think." That night, Lucas fell asleep on the couch watching some mindless cartoon. I sat beside him, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was the kind of stillness that used to make me feel profoundly lonely, but now it felt sacred. I thought about every single time my father had used this house as leverage. "Remember who helped you get that loan. Don't forget whose name's on the papers." Each sentence was another chain wrapped around my throat. I was done being chained. This house was mine. This peace was mine. And he would never set foot in it again with that tone of ownership. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store. Not the big box store. I went to a small local place where the man at the counter, with his gray hair and kind smile, showed me how to change a deadbolt. 20 minutes tops, he said. Easy job if you've got the right screwdriver. He had no idea he was giving me the tools to dismantle a generational prison. Back home, I laid the tools on the kitchen counter. My hands trembled slightly as I unscrewed the old brass plate. Each turn of the screwdriver felt like undoing a decade of manipulation, of control, of being told what I was worth. When the new lock clicked into place, the sound was louder than any word I could have shouted. It was a decisive, metallic punctuation mark on my freedom. I whispered, "My house, my rules." By noon, the inevitable text arrived. "Where's the rest of the money? I need it today." His desperation was so clear, it was almost pathetic. Almost. I replied with the same infuriatingly calm line, Sent what I could. Best wishes. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then again. I could almost feel the fury radiating from his end of the phone, that terrifying rage of a man who suddenly realizes he is losing control. When I didn't answer again, he escalated, just as I knew he would. I'll be by tomorrow at noon. We'll settle this face to face. My stomach twisted, but my heart was steady. I didn't want Lucas anywhere near that poisonous conversation. I texted Destiny, who, bless her, didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Bring him at 11. I'll have cookies waiting. The next morning, I packed Lucas's backpack. You're having a playdate with Auntie Destiny, I said, kissing his forehead. I needed him safe, unaware. I needed to stand alone to face this storm, a storm I wasn't planning to run from this time. I was planning to meet it head-on, in the doorway of my own home, protected by a refinanced deed and a brand new deadbolt. I was ready. Lucas was safe at Destiny's, having cookies and being oblivious to the storm brewing at our front porch. The house was unnervingly quiet, and I could hear the sharp tick of the kitchen clock measuring the seconds until my father arrived. The knock came right on schedule. It wasn't a polite tap, it was 3 hard bangs that made the picture frames on the hallway table tremble. Cora, open this door right now. My father's voice, muffled through the wood, carried that same deep, gravelly tone of total authority, the one he used when I was 16 and grounded for talking back, the one that had always made my heart sink into my stomach. It was a threat, a command, a guarantee of punishment. But this time, I didn't flinch. I stood in the hallway, my fingers brushing the smooth, cool metal of the new lock. My heart was pounding, yes, but it was steady. I walked to the door, took one deep breath, and said, "Open up." I unlatched the chain, just cracked the door, open a crack, maybe 2 inches, and met his glare. His face was already red, his eyes narrowed with that familiar cold fury. "You can stop pounding, Dad," I said, my voice shockingly calm, utterly devoid of the fear he expected. "Your key won't work." He froze. That was my victory. That moment of disbelief, that flicker across, his face, before the rage finally took over. For a split second, he looked genuinely confused, like a puppet master who couldn't understand why his strings weren't working. "You changed the locks on me?" He finally choked out, his voice thick with outrage. "I did," I replied. "After everything I've done for you, everything you've done to me," I corrected softly. I wanted him to hear that correction. That small, soft correction, it was louder than any scream. He wasn't just losing his money. He was losing his narrative. Behind him, my mother lingered on the porch steps, clutching her purse like it was a shield, her eyes darting between me and him. She looked pale, already anticipating the fallout but unwilling to intervene. My sister Bethany stood near the car, pretending to check her phone, clearly wanting no part of this explosion. My brother, Tyler, the golden child for whose benefit this whole charade started, wasn't there. That somehow made it worse. It meant even he couldn't stomach the sight of his father doing this. My father took a step forward, trying to wedge his foot in the door, trying to reclaim the physical space I had just taken from him. "You don't shut family out," he roared. "You didn't seem worried about family when Lucas was blowing out candles alone," I said. It was a clean shot, a bullet straight through his flimsy justification. He opened his mouth, then shut it, his jaw flexing. He had no defense against the truth of the empty bounce house. He tried to pivot, grasping for any excuse to regain control. "You're being dramatic. We had plans. Your brother's graduation. You had excuses." I cut him off, finally letting the volume of my voice rise to meet his. "You always do." For the first time in my life, I didn't lower my voice. I didn't try to soften the truth with qualifiers or apologies. He pointed a finger at me, shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. "You think you can cut me out? I still have a say in this house." I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was small and calm, the smile of someone who has stared down a monster and knows they have the better weapon. Not anymore. I closed the door. Not slammed it, but closed it with smooth, decisive control. I turned the deadbolt. The metallic click was loud, echoing through the quiet house like a punctuation mark, the final sentence in the chapter of my life where he held the power. A minute later, I heard his car door slam, not closed, slammed, then tires screeching down the street, a sound full of fury and impotent rage. He was gone. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a battlefield after the enemy has retreated. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had won, that the boundary was set and recognized. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. He wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat. He was the kind of man to scorch the earth around you so you couldn't stand on it. I had closed a physical door on him, and his only response was to call in the system. His immediate next move was to use the very institutions of law and authority institutions I had always respected to try and break me. I was cleaning up the kitchen, the sense of triumphant calm still settling over me, when red and blue lights flickered through the window. My stomach dropped. I stepped onto the porch and saw 2 officers walking up the driveway. The war wasn't over. It had just gone from a family fight to a legal battle, and my father was now using the state as his weapon. The sight of the police lights red and blue strobing across my living room rug was a visceral blow. It wiped away all the calm I had felt moments before. My father had left in a screaming rage, and his immediate response wasn't remorse or even more texts. It was institutional abuse. He had called the system on his own daughter. My stomach dropped, sickeningly. I stepped onto the porch and watched 2 officers walking up the driveway. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a man leveraging his position to invoke the power of the state against me. "Ma'am," one officer said, his face professional and neutral. "We got a call from your father, Gary Ward. He says you locked him out of his property and may be keeping a child here against court order." The world tilted. His property? My house, my safe haven, my hard-won independence, suddenly being questioned by 2 armed men in uniform. The sheer audacity, the depth of his malice, stole my breath. "What?" I managed to choke out. "He claims there's concern for the child's safety," the officer continued, unfazed by my shock. Concern for the child's safety. The man who stood up his 5-year-old grandson on his birthday was suddenly worried about his safety. The hypocrisy was a burning acid in my throat. I forced myself to take a breath, fighting the shaking that threatened to overwhelm me. I couldn't afford to look unstable right now. "You're welcome to check," I said, my voice deliberately steady. "My son's with a friend right now, but this is my house. I refinanced it months ago. His name is off the deed. I have the paperwork inside." I led them into the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd stood just yesterday, whispering, "My house, my rules," after changing the lock. I laid the manila envelope on the table. Deed copies, payment records, the works. The final, clean, solitary paperwork proving that every inch of this property belonged to Cora Ward alone. One officer nodded slowly, running a finger down the refinance date. "Everything checks out, ma'am. Looks like your father doesn't live here." He shot the other officer a look, a subtle, knowing glance that said, "We just got played by a bitter family member." They didn't apologize, but they didn't need to. Their quick dismissal of his claims was a victory. When they left, the red and blue lights vanished, leaving only the quiet yellow of the porch light. I sank and onto the couch, shaking not from fear, but from the utter absurdity of it all. He'd really called the police on his own daughter, using lies about property rights and child safety as weapons. But the relief was fleeting. My calm certainty was replaced by a darker, colder knowledge. He wasn't done yet. He had lost control in the most humiliating way at the hand of a simple deadbolt, and he would lash out again. Harder, more viciously. The father I knew did not retreat. He escalated. By the next morning, I'd stopped expecting peace. I woke up knowing the next attack was coming. I just didn't know the form it would take. When my phone buzzed at 8:04 a.m., I already knew it wouldn't be good news. It was a message from my sister, Bethany. She was still in the orbit of his control, but maybe a piece of her still recognized the danger. Her text was short and chilling. "Dad said you're in trouble. CPS might stop by today. Just cooperate, okay?" I stared at the screen, and the disbelief gave way to a white-hot fury so sharp it made my hands shake. He hadn't just called the cops. He'd called Child Protective Services. He didn't just want his money or his control back. He wanted to destroy me. He wanted to take the one thing in my life that he couldn't touch, the one thing I loved more than anything, Lucas. He was leveraging the state's power to threaten my motherhood. The man who couldn't be bothered to attend his grandson's birthday was now trying to paint me as an unfit mother. This wasn't about money or graduation. This was about punishment. This was about crushing the insolent daughter who dared to defy him. My mind raced. Lucas was safe at Destiny's, but the sheer effort of this latest betrayal felt suffocating. I started pacing the kitchen, the smell of burnt toast lingering from breakfast, a dull knot of dread tightening in my chest. He wanted me to panic, to run, to prove his claim of instability. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I would be calm. I would be professional. I would document everything. The legal war had begun, and I had to be armor-plated. The doorbell would ring any minute, and this time, the stakes were impossibly high. The minute the doorbell rang, my stomach clenched into a fist. Through the window, I saw her. A woman in a navy blazer holding a clipboard, her smile careful but professional. She was from CPS, and she was here because my father, the man who believed he was above all law and decency, had called her. He hadn't just wanted his money. He wanted to destroy my life and sever the only pure good thing in it. I opened the door, forcing my voice steady. "Miss Cora Ward?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "You must be from CPS, Jennifer." She nodded. "We received a report of possible neglect. Something about leaving your child unattended." Unattended. My sister's text had been right. It was a calculated, vicious lie. He was trying to imply I had abandoned Lucas when I dropped him at Destiny's house, a safe, loving environment specifically to protect him from the storm he was creating. My laugh came out half-broken, a mixture of fury and disbelief. "That's creative. Come in." I stepped aside, inviting her into my house. This was my stand. I had to look like the stable, organized mother I was, not the raging, terrified daughter my father claimed me to be. As she walked through, I pointed out the evidence of my life. Lucas's drawings on the fridge, his school photo on the wall, the neatly stacked lunchboxes on the counter. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and crayons. It was a home, not a disaster zone. "Lucas is with a friend right now," I explained calmly, maintaining eye contact. "He's 5. I can give you her number if you want to verify." Jennifer was sharp. She scanned the living room like she'd seen this scene 100 times, the panicked mother, the rushed cleaning, the attempts at presentation. But there was nothing for her to find. The house was calm, secure, and clearly child-focused. "You seem organized," she said finally, her voice neutral. Then came the question I knew was coming, but one she probably didn't ask lightly. "Do you know who might have made the report?" I almost laughed again, the raw, painful sound catching in my throat. "My father." Her brows lifted slightly. That was the first indication she believed me. "That happens more often than you'd think." That was the validation I needed. She closed her notebook. "Everything looks fine here. I'll file this as unfounded." The relief that hit me when the door closed behind her was so massive, I literally exhaled like I'd been underwater. My entire body shook. He had used the cops, and they had been dismissed. He had used CPS, the lowliest, most desperate weapon in his arsenal, and that, too, had been dismissed. But relief was quickly replaced by a certainty, a cold dread. My father hadn't made a mistake. He wasn't lashing out blindly. He was escalating. He was testing legal boundaries, trying to find a weak spot. Destiny came by that night with takeout. I told her everything. The text, the locks, the police, the CPS visit. She listened, shaking her head, her anger matching mine. "Girl, this isn't family anymore. This is harassment." "I know," I said quietly. "And I'm done playing defense." The next morning, I moved from defense to offense. I called Gregory, the real estate lawyer who'd handled my refinance. "I need to make sure my dad can't access anything tied to the old mortgage," I said. I had to ensure the financial chain was permanently broken. Gregory looked over the files, then smiled. "You're clean. Everything's in your name alone." But he gave me crucial advice. "You might want to talk to someone in family law just to make it official." That's how I met Vanessa. She had a calm voice, sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that didn't flinch at messy families. I told her the whole story, from the empty bounce house to the CPS clipboard. I didn't look surprised. "We'll file for a restraining order," she said. "He's already used law enforcement once. You need to protect yourself before he does it again." I hated the idea. A restraining order against my own father? It felt like a final, public, undeniable admission that my family was broken beyond repair. But he had forced my hand. He had forfeited his right to be considered family the moment he tried to take my child. It took a week to gather everything: police reports, the CPS visit record, screenshots of his vile, demanding text messages, even voicemails he left calling me ungrateful and unstable. Vanessa organized it all into a binder so thick it felt like a heavy suit of armor. I wasn't going into that courtroom to beg. I was going in to demand my peace, permanently. The war had moved to the courthouse, and I intended to win the only thing that mattered, my freedom. The week I spent gathering evidence felt like an eternity. Every screenshot of a demanding, heartless text, every record of my father's malicious reports to the police and CPS was a fresh stab of betrayal. Vanessa, my lawyer, was meticulous. She didn't let me wallow in the pain. She used it. She turned my emotional wounds into a legal defense, organizing every single piece of data into that binder. It wasn't just paper, it was my armor. He had used the system to try and hurt me, and now I was using the system to ensure my survival. I reread the voicemails he left, calling me ungrateful and unstable. He was projecting his own fury onto me, trying to paint me as the villain for simply asking to be treated like a person, not a disposable resource. Each cruel word fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for money or a house anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for Lucas's future, and for the right to define my own reality. When the court date came, the air outside was heavy and wet, like the sky was holding its breath. It matched the weight in my chest. I chose the simplest outfit I owned, jeans, a black blouse. I needed to look like what I was, a working mother demanding justice, not a drama queen looking for revenge. I clutched the binder so tightly my knuckles turned white. That binder held the story of my entire relationship with my family, summarized by their absence and their attempts to destroy me. Destiny was there, sitting behind me in the gallery. Her presence was a silent anchor, a reminder that I had chosen real, supportive family over the toxic blood tie. Then they walked in. My father, Gary, in his Sunday suit, the mask of respectability firmly in place. My mother trailed behind him, eyes red, refusing to look my way. She was the collateral damage of his ego, forced to witness the total, public collapse of the family unit because of his desperate need for control. Tyler wasn't there, and I didn't blame him. This spectacle was reserved for the main players. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a sterile smell for a deeply messy, poisonous event. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I didn't look at my father. I focused on the judge, channeling all my pain into a beam of absolute truth. "Miss Ward," the judge said, his voice flat as he glanced at the paperwork. "You're requesting a restraining order against your father, Gary Ward." "Yes, Your Honor." My voice barely wavered. I was proud of that. Vanessa took over. She was incredible, laying out each piece of evidence with surgical precision. The text messages, the police report from the lock incident, where he lied and claimed ownership, the CPS document, damningly marked unfounded. Gary shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening with every exhibit. His carefully crafted image was being stripped away, paper by paper. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he stood abruptly, his face contorted in righteous indignation. He couldn't help himself. He had to try and regain control. "This is ridiculous," he practically shouted. "I was worried about my grandson. She's unstable, emotional. She needs family support." Family support? I couldn't stop myself. The words escaped me, a tight, painful whisper of pure rage. "Family support? You called the cops on me, Dad." The judge cut him off, his voice firming. "Sir, did you call the police and child protective services on your daughter?" My father hesitated. Yes, but I had reason." "Was your reason verified?" the judge pressed. My father paused again, searching for a lie, but the paperwork was right there. "No, but..." The judge raised a hand. "That's enough." The silence that followed was complete. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, a low buzzing sound that felt like the final soundtrack to his downfall. He had admitted his malice. He had tried to use the system, and now the system was ready to expose him. My fight was nearly over, and the only thing left to do was receive the verdict I had paid for with years of emotional damage. I was prepared for the gavel to fall, to finally seal the door I had already deadbolted. The air in the courtroom was suffocating. After my father stumbled over his admission that he did call the police and CPS, and that his reason wasn't verified, the silence was immense. He was exposed. He had used the system, and the system had just turned on him. His face went pale, the shock of losing total control finally visible beneath the rage. He was silent for the first time in his life, and it was a glorious sound. Vanessa, sensing the perfect moment to deliver the finishing blow, didn't let the silence linger. She slid a photo across the table for the judge to see. It was Lucas, alone, sitting by that gigantic superhero cake, the candles burning down uselessly. It was the image of my son's crushed happiness, the visual representation of my family's betrayal. This, she said, her voice cutting through the tension, was the day Mr. Ward and his family were supposed to attend. Instead, 3 days later, he texted her for money. "This isn't concern, Your Honor. This is coercion." My father didn't have words. For once, the self-proclaimed patriarch, the man who dictated my life for decades, had nothing. His head was bowed, not in shame, but in the white-hot fury of a megalomaniac whose power had just been legally revoked. I waited, clutching my armor the binder until the final sound came. When the gavel finally hit the wood, the sharp crack echoed like thunder in my chest. It wasn't just a sound, it was a detonation, a liberation. The judge's voice was steady and absolute. 4-year restraining order granted. Mr. Ward, you are not to contact or visit Miss Ward or her child, directly or indirectly. Any violation will result in arrest. Arrest. The man who had called the police on me was now legally barred from coming within a certain distance, or he himself would face handcuffs. The poetic justice was breathtaking. I had won. I had fought his malice with evidence and boundaries, and I had won the final battle. I didn't look at my father as I stood to leave. My mother's eyes were still red, but still averted. They were a defeated army, shuffling out of the courtroom, their campaign of cruelty over. Outside the courthouse, the sky finally opened up. Rain poured down, cold and clean. I stepped onto the wet stone steps and just stood there, letting it soak through my hair and clothes. Destiny rushed to me, opening her umbrella, but I waved her off. "I want to feel it," I said. She smiled softly, a genuine, joyful smile. "You earned it." The rain felt like a baptism. It was washing away the grime of years of manipulation and guilt. It was washing away the sting of that empty driveway and the fear of the CPS clipboard. For the first time in years, I wasn't just safe. I was legally, irrevocably free. That night, my phone buzzed again. My heart leaped, a vestigial spasm of fear, but it wasn't him. It was Tyler, my brother. "I'm sorry, Ka. I didn't know he'd go that far." For a second, the old me, the dependable one, almost replied. I almost offered him absolution, almost tried to mend the break, but the new me, the one who fought for the deadbolt and survived the courtroom, stopped. Some doors, once locked, should stay that way. The legal boundary I had set was not just for my father. It was for anyone who confused obligation with love. As I checked on Lucas, sleeping soundly with his tiny hand resting on his stuffed dinosaur, I realized this peace wasn't just relief. It was freedom, the kind you fight for. The restraining order changed everything quietly but completely. No more phone calls, no more texts demanding explanations or money, no more footsteps on my porch pretending to check on us. The silence was finally light, replacing the heavy dread that used to fill every pause in my life. The war was over, and the reconstruction of my life could finally begin. The restraining order was the final metallic click of a door that it had needed closing for years. The sound of that gavel was the sound of my father's total defeat, and the freedom that followed was quiet, but immense. For the first time in years, mornings felt light. I wasn't waking up with my stomach twisting, dreading the next buzz of my phone, the next impossible demand, the next veiled threat. The peace wasn't just a lack of fighting. It was a total absence of his suffocating influence. No more phone calls, no more texts demanding explanations or money. No more footsteps on my porch pretending to check on us, really just checking on his investment. Lucas started humming to himself while coloring, his little songs filling a silence that used to be heavy with dread. That was the real victory, the return of joy to my son's small world. Word got around fast in our family. My mother stopped by once. Just once. I didn't see her. I only saw the evidence of her visit. A basket of fruit left on the doorstep with a note that said, "I hope you're okay." The note was flimsy, a whisper of concern that felt too little, too late. She didn't call. She didn't violate the order, but she didn't cross the line of genuine support either. I never called her back. I couldn't. Her silence through decades of his control was as damaging as his rage. Tyler, my brother, the golden child for whom the entire $2,200 charade was mounted, texted on Thanksgiving. A polite happy holiday. I replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was enough. A neutral acknowledgement of a distant blood tie, nothing more. He got his space, and I got mine. There was no longer any expectation of sacrifice or financial bailout. A month after the court date, a final, beautiful piece of evidence arrived in the mail. It was a letter from CPS, confirming the case was officially closed. The language was cold, bureaucratic, and utterly satisfying. The report had been labeled a malicious report. Malicious report. He used the system to try and ruin me, and the system used that single, damning phrase to expose him. My lawyer, Vanessa, called it poetic justice. He used the system, she said, and the system exposed him. It wasn't about unstable behavior. It was about calculated, documented malice. The CPS letter was the final nail in the coffin of his manufactured narrative. Destiny and I celebrated with takeout and cheap champagne. She looked at me, grinning, and said, "You realize, you just ended a generational curse, right?" I laughed, then cried, realizing she was absolutely right. For the first time, I'd chosen peace over guilt, and it hadn't destroyed me, it had made me free. That choice manifested in small, tangible ways. The next week, I bought paint. A soft teal color. I repainted the front door. New color, new chapter. Lucas helped, his little hands covered in paint, leaving small streaks along the bottom panel. He looked up at me, innocent as ever, and asked, "Can we invite Grandpa to see it?" The question was a pinprick of pain. He didn't understand the invisible wall I had built, the legal protection that kept him safe. I knelt beside him, my heart aching with the weight of the truth I couldn't share. "Maybe one day," I said, "but right now this is just ours." He nodded, satisfied, already distracted by his brushstrokes, and I knew I had done the right thing. I had protected his innocence, and my peace. The old house was finally, truly mine, inside and out. That night, after I tucked Lucas in, I sat on the couch. It was the same spot where, a year before, I had cried over a lonely birthday cake. But tonight, I smiled. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater, a sound of security, not dread. I thought about my father's face in court, the raw shock of losing control. He wore that mask of authority his entire life, and in that moment, it crumbled. For so long, he had mistaken my obedience for love. He genuinely believed that if I wasn't doing exactly what he demanded, I was wrong. But love isn't control. Love is letting go. And I had finally done it. I had let go of the obligation, the guilt, and the toxic burden of his expectations. The teal paint on the front door was more than just a color change. It was a physical boundary, a bright, undeniable statement of ownership. Every time I unlocked that door, I was reminded that this space was mine, and the rules were set by me and Lucas. I was building a new life, and the foundation was solid, built on the rock of my own integrity, not the shifting sand of his approval. The silence that followed the restraining order was a gift I hadn't known how much I needed. There was no more anxiety knotting in my stomach at every phone buzz. My focus at work improved. I was a better mother. I could actually enjoy making pancakes without my mind racing through escape scenarios. The heavy shroud of dread that used to cover my life was gone, lifted by the truth and the force of law. The battle had been brutal, forcing me to confront years of manipulation head-on. He had attacked my finances, my home, my reputation, and, unforgivably, my fitness as a mother. But in trying to destroy me, he had inadvertently freed me. He forced me to take steps refinancing the house, changing the locks, filing the restraining order that I might never have taken if he had simply been a normal, neglectful parent. His malice was the catalyst for my metamorphosis. I had learned that some wounds don't heal with forgiveness. They heal with distance, with absolute, unyielding boundaries. When Tyler texted that brief apology after the hearing, I didn't know he'd go that far. I understood that he too was a victim of our father's control, but his weakness didn't justify the harm. My silence in response was an act of self-preservation, not cruelty. Some doors, once locked, should stay that way. I looked forward now, not back. I was no longer the dependable, long-suffering daughter. I was Cora, the survivor, the protector of my son, and the fiercely independent owner of her own life. The next big milestone was coming, Lucas's next birthday. And this time, it wouldn't be a test of my family's loyalty. It would be a celebration of our freedom. I was going to throw the same party, same backyard, same bounce house, same cake. But this time, the guest list would be filled with people who chose to be there, not people who felt obligated. The pain of the empty driveway would always be a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. It was the moment I stopped begging for love and started demanding respect. And respect, I had learned, was something you sometimes had to fight the people closest to you to earn. I was ready for the next year, ready for the next chapter. And for the first time, I was excited to see what it would bring. A year had passed since the gavel fell and the cold rain washed away the dread. A year of silence, a year of peace, and a year of rebuilding my life on my own terms. The ultimate test of my victory arrived, not in a courtroom, but in my backyard. It was Lucas's 6th birthday. I did it. I threw the same party. Same backyard, same rented bounce house, same oversized superhero cake. But this time, everything was different. This time, the table was full. I walked around the yard, watching the scene unfold, and the joy was so potent it made my eyes sting. Destiny was there, of course, her nieces running around with Lucas. My coworkers came with their kids. People who chose to be there because they loved me, not because they were obligated. There were no strained smiles, no checking of watches, no lingering sense of duty. Just laughter, warm and ordinary, filling the space where a suffocating silence once reigned. Lucas wore a paper crown, a little bent from last year's lonely celebration, and he was grinning so hard his cheeks hurt. He didn't remember the pain of the previous year, and that was the greatest gift the restraining order had given me, the ability to protect his memories from their malice. When it was time to blow out the candles, the crowd gathered around the table. The noise was incredible, a chorus of happy chaos. I looked at Lucas, his face alight in the glow of the tiny flames, and I caught myself whispering, "You're loved, baby. Always." He looked up at me and smiled. That pure, unburdened smile, like he already knew it with absolute certainty. As the sun dipped behind the fence, casting long shadows across the yard, I glanced instinctively at the front gate. It was a habit I was slowly breaking, a final ghost of my anxiety. But there were no shadows waiting, no footsteps that didn't belong, just the warm glow of the porch light reflecting off the new teal paint, and the sound of my life, finally feeling like home. Later, after everyone had left and the bounce house was deflated, I stood in the doorway, looking out. I thought about everything that had broken. Me, every silence, every demanding text, every slam of the car door, every lie told to the police and CPS, and I realized that none of it owned me anymore. The power they had wielded was a paper tiger, easily shredded by boundaries and legal truth. I had been forced to choose. I had been forced to recognize that the word family meant nothing if it was simply a tool for abuse. I made the choice that day to prioritize my peace, my son's stability, and my sanity over their toxic demands. And it worked. Sometimes, the healing doesn't come from a dramatic, forgiving reunion. It doesn't come from turning the other cheek. It comes from building a fortress, locking the door, and realizing that the people trying to hurt you are stuck outside. Sometimes peace doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from boundaries. The journey had been horrific, forcing me into a public battle against the people who should have been my strongest allies. But in fighting them, I had found my voice, my strength, and my absolute worth. The single dollar I sent was the investment in my future, and the dividend was this beautiful, full, peaceful house. I read every single one of your stories in the comments, and if you've ever had to choose peace over family, you know exactly what I mean. I hope my story about finding your voice when they try to take it helps you as much as sharing it has helped me. The true aftermath of the courtroom drama wasn't the sudden calm. It was the slow, painful process of examining every toxic thread that had tied me to that family for 3 decades. The fear was gone, but the resentment lingered, a low, constant burn I had to extinguish myself. It took months to stop replaying the moments in my head, the police at the door, the CPS clipboard, my father's sneering face in court. I realized that the core of his rage, and my trauma, was all about control. He needed me to owe him. He needed my dependence because it validated his self-image as the patriarch, the provider, the ultimate authority. When I worked double shifts for Lucas, when I bought my own house, when I refinanced it without telling him, I wasn't just being independent, I was eroding his perceived power. The demand for the $2,200 wasn't about Tyler's graduation funds. It was a desperate attempt to reassert dominance, to remind me who was still supposedly holding the purse strings. And my response, the single dollar, was an act of profound insubordination. It was me saying, I see your control, and I reject it. My worth is $1 to you, and that's all your opinion means to me. It was a moment of perfect, stinging clarity, and it cost me my family, but it purchased my soul. I spent a lot of time thinking about my mother. She was not the active villain, but she was the enabler. She was the one who smoothed his cruelty, who refused to see the truth, who sacrificed her own daughter's well-being for the sake of a quiet life next to a tyrant. Her note, "I hope you're okay," was a coward's gesture. It was an acknowledgement of the fire, but a refusal to help fight it. I had to forgive her silence, not for her sake, but for mine to cut the final cord of expectation. If she couldn't choose me over him, then I had to choose myself over both of them. And that was the final, hard lesson. The necessity of radical self-choice. For years, I had believed that choosing family meant choosing to endure their abuse. I confused obligation with love. Love is expansive. It allows growth. Obligation is restrictive. It demands shrinkage. I had finally stopped shrinking. I thought about the word family. What was it now? It was Lucas, a vibrant, safe, happy boy whose laughter was my new soundtrack. It was Destiny, who rushed over with takeout and champagne, who served as my emotional witness and legal cheerleader. It was the teal-painted door, the fresh scent of lemon cleaner, and the quiet hum of the heater, the physical embodiment of my peaceful new life. I had built a family, a true family, from scratch, based on mutual respect and genuine care, not blood. The man who tried to take my house and my son was now nothing more than a name on a legal document, a restraining order that kept my peace safe. The rage that had fueled the initial battle slowly subsided, replaced by a cold, sustainable pity. He hadn't just lost a daughter. He had lost his humanity by prioritizing his ego over every human connection he had. His need for control was so vast, so absolute, that it consumed his own life. I finally understood that the most powerful form of revenge wasn't the $1 or the gavel. It was my indifference. It was thriving without him. It was allowing myself to be happy, safe, and free. That was the final letting go. The absence of conflict eventually became a new kind of normal, but the memories weren't erased. They were filed away, cataloged as crucial historical documents. I had to continually check myself, ensuring I wasn't carrying the residue of their control into my new, healthy relationships. It's hard to unlearn 30 years of conditioning. I had been conditioned to believe my worth was transactional. If I fixed Tyler's car, if I paid the money, if I kept the secret, if I smiled and obeyed, then I was worthy of their conditional love. My act of sending the single dollar was the rejection of that entire system. It was the declaration, my worth is inherent, not based on the balance of my checking account or my willingness to sacrifice my own child's happiness for their demands. The true cost of my peace wasn't the legal fees, the police visits, or the CPS scare. The true cost was the final devastating realization that the people I called family were completely, fundamentally incapable of unconditional love. They were dangerous. They were predators who confused their own blood for guaranteed prey. That realization felt like a limb being severed, painful and irreversible, but ultimately necessary for survival. I thought about the future. Lucas would grow up with a story about his grandfather, and it wouldn't be a happy one. I couldn't sugarcoat the truth, but I could frame it. I would teach him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is protect your own light from people who want to snuff it out. I would teach him about boundaries, that invisible shield you deploy to keep the toxicity out and the love in. I was no longer angry, not in the screaming, shaking way of the courthouse. My anger had cooled into a fierce, crystalline resolve. It was the anger of a protector, the same anger I felt when those blue and red lights flashed across my living room. That anger became my sword, and now it was sheathed, ready only if the boundary was threatened again. The restraining order gave me a 4-year window of legally enforced peace. I knew that after 4 years, he might try again, testing the waters with a benign-sounding text or a letter, and I would be ready. The locks would still be new. The deed would still be solely in my name. The CPS file would still say, malicious report. I had built a fortress around my life, brick by emotional brick, and I would defend it with the same ferocity I had used on the day I closed the deadbolt and whispered, my house, my rules. I had been the victim of emotional and financial abuse, but I refused to remain a victim. My story was now a story of survival, independence, and victorious self-ownership. I was not unstable, as he claimed. I was fiercely stable, precisely because I had removed the source of all the instability from my life, and that stability was my final, quiet, perfect revenge. My life, after the storm, is defined not by what they took, but by what I saved. The true victory wasn't just the restraining order, it was the realization of my own sovereignty. They spent 3 decades convincing me I was indebted, dependent, and fundamentally flawed. The truth is, I was always strong enough. I just needed to be pushed past the point of return to find the courage to lock the door. That courage, born of white-hot anger and protective instinct for my son, is my most valuable possession. It allowed me to transform their malice into my foundation. The malicious report from CPS, the lie about the house, the cruelty of the empty birthday party, all of it now serves as a constant, cold reminder of why this peace is non-negotiable. I am the gatekeeper of my own sanity, and that gate is permanently locked. When I think of the whole affair now, I don't feel the sting of betrayal. I feel a detached gratitude. My father's ego, his desperate need for control, became the tool of my liberation. By demanding an impossible sum and then attacking my ability to mother, he forced me to stop playing the victim and become the warrior. He taught me the most painful lesson, that boundaries are not cruel, they are self-preservation. The old Cora, the dependable helper, is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who understands that love is not control and that self-respect is the highest form of loyalty. I look at the teal door, the symbol of my new chapter, and I feel a fierce, quiet pride. Lucas is thriving, growing up in a home where laughter is genuine and stability is constant, undisturbed by the shadow of a man who confused family with ownership. I often think of that single dollar. It was the cheapest, most effective investment I ever made. It was a refusal. It was the first shot fired in a war for my identity. And in the end, it purchased my freedom, secured my home, and guaranteed my son's happiness. If you are listening to this, and you are standing at your own locked door, unsure of your next step, let my story be your answer. Don't wait for forgiveness or an apology that will never come. Choose yourself. Choose your peace. Build your boundaries and defend them fiercely, because they are the only things that will last. The price of freedom is high, but the price of remaining enslaved is your soul. I chose freedom. And in the quiet of my own home, I finally won the only war that mattered.